Tanya Long, and I'm not sought after by Interpol in any form or fashion. So, the only thing is maybe the PTA. So I guess that's the reality. So, sorry, I realized this morning I've got to get a life. So, there's been a lot of discussion this morning, and it's very interesting as I think about it, and I think you would have thought that we all got together over glasses of wine last night and discussed what we were going to say today. So it's really interesting to see the common themes that are coming through from all of us. But the approach I'd like to take today is very much an emphasis on what has been said already, but a slightly different approach to it. So bear with me on this one. And here's the clicker, and we have the same. Okay. Sorry. So let's start with something. Would you agree that this is the alphabet as we learned it? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay, we'd agree that. What is really interesting to know is that the world has changed. And the alphabet of today looks like this. And if you think about it, what it has done, it has created a completely new, different set of customers, new generation, and new expectations. So what is important, we've heard about knowing your market. And does anybody know anything about generational theory? Generation X, millennials, we have a lot of millennials. Yes, no, you're not a millennial. I'm not a millennial.
I have two.
You have two. Oh, you have three. Okay. So the interesting concept when we look at generational theory is we look at the concept of the new generation, of Generation Z. And Generation Z is the youngest generation that we're experiencing at the moment. But stats from the Pew Research Center actually says that between millennials and Generation Z, they are overtaking our consumer base. To the point that they say that by the end of 2020, 40% of the consumers will be Generation Z. And that's quite interesting. So let's look at this generation. This is the generation that has never grown up not knowing that there was no internet. This is a generation that has grown up with phones. 99% of this generation have phones. The other 1% are under the age of 4. And this is the generation which, interestingly enough, they say checks their phones, 73% of them check their phones at least once an hour. And that's a really interesting concept to think about. So what we know is that this is definitely driving change for us. And because of this, we've spoken about it today, there's enhanced access, there's greater choice. So this is the generation with greater choice to information, products, services, anything you can actually think of. And this is what is driving our approach. When on the panel was what is driving our customers of today, it is this as a foundation. What we need to keep in mind is because of all of this, when we talk about fourth industrial revolution, tech innovation, we've got new shopping behaviors, we have got new expectations, and we also have consumers who actually are used to and are enthralled by technology. And I was looking at, I actually want to go and see the guys outside with the wonderful digital holograms. Really very sexy. And this is what people are looking for today. Whilst this generation, the generations embrace technology, what we need to keep in mind, and we've also spoken about it today, is the humanness of it all. Because in its essence, we are all the same. We are all driven by emotions. And emotions is what drives the decisions that we take. And there's one emotion that stands above the rest. And that emotion is trust. And we've spoken about it this morning as well. So in John Sanai's book, Moonshot, he talks about hyper-trust, hyper-personalization, hyper-convenience, hyper-value, and hyper-recognition. And he's saying this is the trend that is actually driving us today. And this is what's important to understand. So I found this wonderful model from an author, Charles Green, who wrote the book, The Trusted Advisor. Now he's called it the trust equation. This is not only useful in sales, but also in leadership and when we deal with people. And if we consider the humanness of it all. Has anybody seen this model before? So let me explain it to you. So he says that trust is the sum of credibility, reliability, and intimacy. And with regards to reliability and credibility, we think about the fact that we often get that right, but where we go wrong is on the intimacy. And the reason is that reliability and credibility are the rational and logical components. Intimacy is that emotional component of trust. Now, the denominator has the greatest impact on trust. You can do everything on the top. You can get the intimacy right. You can get your credibility and reliability. But he talks about self-orientation. So for somebody to understand whether or not you are after your own best interest or theirs is the concept of self-orientation. So customers and people want to know that you have their best interest at heart. And this is a very interesting concept. There's stats that say that loyal customers and customers you trust purchase 10 times and spend 10 times more with you. And when we talk about the concept of trust, everybody here is talking very technical and technical innovation, tech trends. We need to go back to the core. I'd like to propose to you that the basis for embracing fourth industrial revolution technologies is the concept of trust and the trust equation. So I want you to just take a step back and think about, and I'm going to go back a step here, what is the TQ of your business? You know, we hear about IQ, we hear about EQ. What is the TQ of your business? And where would you need to start in order to move that forward? Trust is what customers want. So if we look at customer experience as being our anchor point, and we move it forward to say, let's begin with the end in mind, how do we achieve this objective of our customers feeling that we know them and feeling that we have their best interests at heart? And this is where we talk about machine learning and AI. So before we go into AI, I mean, it's such a broad area. And I know you paid good value for money, and you need to get value for money right here. So we talk about the AI revolution is already happening. So when we talk about AI, we have ANI, which is the artificial narrow intelligence, and that is now evolving into AGI and ASI, and that is the future of AI. And it's already happening, and it's upon us. And when we talk about disruption, that's what's going on. But let's go back to AI, because that's what we want to talk about today. So AI can be broken down into various components, and we've heard about the concept of machine learning. And we've heard a lot of the speakers today talk about machine learning like it's just something that you do every day. But I know that it's not always the case. And when we think about what machine learning is, it's really just a way to process data in a very fast lightning speeds. That's what machine learning is. So what is true is that we all hear about AI. A lot of people know about it. But we're very hesitant to take the first step. Where do we start? We're waiting for something to happen to show us this is the way to go. So let's unpack a little bit of the concept of what AI actually is. And when I want to talk about specifically machine learning and prescriptive and predictive analytics. So what are these things? These things are algorithms that take a subset of data, analyze it, and apply it to a certain situation. That's what it is. It really isn't as scary as we make it out to be. I mean, we often think about it as though, should we use it or should we not use it? And if you think about the opportunities that AI and machine learning and predictive and prescriptive analytics allows us, I mean, it is amazing. So what we know is it processes data at lightning speeds. And if you think about the concept of it doesn't need sleep, works 24/7, 365, bearing that ESCOM and we don't have load shedding, but yeah. And when we look at the reasons why AI is attractive in comparison to what we need to do as humans, there are so many advantages. But it's important to understand that AI is not a magic wand. You cannot buy intelligence. Essentially, what you need to do is you need to nurture your models by providing it with fresh data. It's like you nurture a child by providing it with experiences, because these algorithms teach themselves and grow and improve in an ongoing fashion. And that's what you need to aim for. So nurturing is required. So we say that the future of AI in retail and supply chain is a blend of machine intelligence and human intelligence. Because the one thing about AI, it does not do judgment. And decisions are taken based upon judgment. And this is where the human element comes into it. Humans are needed to take those predictions and to apply them in the field. And when we look at predictions, that is where the importance of the two come through. Often people say to me, well, jobs are going to be lost. But the critical thinking skills required in our organizations is where we need to focus on in growing our people in our organizations. So in order to break it down a little bit more, people often, their eyes glaze over when I talk about AI. And I have to be honest with you, about 2 or 3 years when I started to get involved in the AI field, my eyes glazed over. As you can see, I'm not a completely technical individual. But it's time to drop the scare, because it actually isn't so complex. It's there for all of us to use. So in order to understand what a typical and the business analytics and the data analytic life cycle should look like, I wanted to just show you that it's actually a process that you work through, a continuous evolution, where you take data, you move it through the process, and you move it and you go through the cycle over and over again. What is key is that in the center of it all is business goal. Having clearly defined business goals is what is key to understanding and making your AI work for you. So where to start? In retail, there are 3 key areas that we should be focusing on. The first one is customer. When we talk about hyper-personalization, hyper-trust. The second is demand. And we know that if anybody is here in the merchandising departments, merchandising is a complex field. So looking at the demand. And then the third area for improving efficiencies is in supply. And this is where we're looking at warehousing, supply chain, logistics, picking, packing, all of those efficiencies. So these are the 3 areas, if you were wanting to take that first step, to start looking at, my suggestion. But data itself is meaningless. It is up to us to put data into context. Let me give you an example. I say the word smoking. What comes to mind? So, I don't read minds, but I'm not even putting a bet on how many percentage of the audience would say, definitely smoking hot woman. That comes to mind. Or, for those of you who didn't have snacks, maybe smoking ribs. And for the others, it could be, darn it, smoking a cigarette. Not a cigarette, but a cigarette. So what is important to understand is data doesn't create meaning. We do. And we are responsible for looking at our data and putting it into context. So where would you start? So everybody's alluded, we've all got data. Do we agree? We have data. We have lots of data. And if you think about the data that you have, these are just some examples on the left-hand side of probably data that you have in your organization. Then if we move across, past the little guy in the center, you will see certain high-level objectives that if you were wanting to achieve, what would then be the models that you would be wanting to implement into your organization? And there are quite a few. So essentially, the more data you feed in, as we've spoken, the better you can get with your predictions. We know that the use of data is not new. Big data is not new. And you may be looking at this screen. The other day, I got this email from somebody which said, "Hi, Vincent. Hope you're well." And I think it was a discount or a money off on a Ryobi chainsaw, which you obviously would understand that is my preference on the weekends. So what we can see is that using data, you can really get it wrong. It's really easy to get it wrong. And that's why we need to make sure that we nurture it correctly and we take it forward. In the Argility Technology Group world, when we focus a lot on working with retailers and with supply chain. These are some of the analytics models and the models that we have created in order to help our customers, in order for them to help their customers. And you will see that there are such a variety, from recommendation engines to segmentation to demand forecasting. There are many things that you can do with your data, and that's why I'm saying defining that business goal is all key, because it would depend on the kind of models you would want to train. So whilst we have all this data, it's important to understand that whilst we turn data into information and information into insight, it's important to turn insight into action. Because if you invest in analytics and you don't actually have a look at the downstream actions you need to take in the field, then the investment is worthless. So to end up, in order to move forward, some of the really steps that we would break it down is involve your stakeholders. Having stakeholders who can give you the insight from the beginning of the process all the way through is absolutely key. Next thing, select a business goal. Gather the data. Don't be paralyzed by the fact that the data is incomplete or inadequate. And I heard Neil say, and I agree with him, getting your house in order is important, but I urge you, take the first step, because as you're going through this process, you will be able to refine your data and you will be able to improve your insights. So don't be paralyzed by the fact, oh, I don't have enough data or my data is incomplete. Nurture it. Transform that information into insight and then take action. And rinse and repeat. But by all means, what is key is to take the step. Those companies who successfully implement AI will be the difference between the winners and the losers. Will definitely be the ones who will have the competitive edge. Those who can get small incremental wins, it will build momentum exponentially over time. And a lot of people are hesitant because they focus too much upon the cost instead of looking at the value. And if those small wins incrementally build, you will be ahead of the curve. So I'd like to thank you for your time today. And I wish you a really good, very interesting rest of the day. And yes, thank you.